Well, hello, everybody. How are we doing? I hope we're all doing well this evening. I see that I knew I was getting the TikTok shives from Dana, even though I believe the stream actually went live uh, more or less on time. Now, I mean, you wouldn't be seeing my face quite yet because I take a few seconds after the hour actually clicks over to, close off the document with all the patron questions. Um, because I leave that open until literally showtime, um, so that any stragglers can have their questions included. Oh, now Colby's giving me TikTok. You see what you started, Dana? See what you started? Turning my own people against me. So anyway, as usual, oh, you know what? 255 AD, yeah, and he's worried about Catwoman. He's not worried about me. So yeah, see, he's paying attention to Catwoman, so he won't be a problem. Oh, thank you, Dana. That's sweet. It's worth the wait. So anyway, as usual, I will be answering questions that were submitted ahead of time by my wonderful Patreon patrons and channel members. So if you, I don't dance, Stephen G. Clenard. I'm like Angel. I don't dance. But anyway, so, and I'm not a monkey either, by the way. I'm a human being. So a little respect, please. Anyway, as usual, I will be answering questions submitted ahead of time by my wonderful Patreon patrons and channel members for the first part of the show. So if you have something you want to ask me or show me or have me talk about in the live chat, or if you were going to be generous and throw a super chat my way, if possible, please hold off on that until I get through the patron and member questions, and then I will devote my full attention for the remainder of the show from that point on to the live chat. So now, Dana, yeah, I thought about that. The little quick cutaway gag to Angel dancing. And no, you're not going to get to see that because it doesn't exist. Anyway, let us begin, shall we, with the patron and member questions. And the first one of those comes from Larry Bliss, bon vivant and raconteur. I enjoyed your videos on season 5 of Discovery. If you had been the showrunner, what would you have done differently, such as an alternate storyline to the chase quest? Well, I can't really sit here and spontaneously pitch an alternate story for the season, but I will say there are things they could have done as far as what they actually did to make it play a little better. Like, for instance, have them find the clues by like episode 5 instead of waiting until episode 10 to actually find all the clues and go to the location of the super secret technology. Like, resolve the chase part of it in the first half of the season and then pivot into a different story that's still obviously related, still the same sort of players and the same ultimate goal, but instead of let's look for the clue, here's the clue, let's go for the next clue. Like, just if you need to do the fucking treasure hunt stuff, resolve that by episode 5 and then pivot and come up with something else for the back half, that is still related to that, but is different. So you're not just stretching out a fucking treasure hunt, for the entire season. I also think they could have done, they could have had stronger villains. It still could have been Maul and Locke. Like, they could have kept the same characters, but just make them a little more threatening, a little stronger, a little, to make it feel like they pose some actual threat to the heroes and stand between the heroes and the heroes' goals in a way that feels credible, which it just never did in season 5 of Discovery. And my blanket advice, my blanket wish, I guess I should say, for any show like that is get rid of all the fan service. Get rid of the TNG Easter egg. Make the instead of the instead of the progenitors technology, make it like that but different. Don't make it a TNG Easter egg. Don't show fucking stills from an unremarkable TNG episode. Leave out all the fucking bullshit with Kovich at the end and his little reveal and his little Easter egg shelf. Cut out the completely unnecessary tacked on ending where they try desperately and very clunkily to seam the end of Discovery with Calypso. Just lose all of that stuff that doesn't need to be there and just pulls it down. And tinker with the story structure and just, do a better job. Peter Taylor, did action Picard of the TNG movies ruin the character? No. One of these days I'm going to do a video about this. I have a concept for a Trek Actually video in my notes that I think has maybe even been in the topic poll once or twice that hasn't gotten picked yet. But one of these days I'm going to do a video about TV Picard versus movie Picard, and is there really that much of a difference, and does movie Picard take anything away from TV Picard? Because short version is, I don't think it does. I think it's completely fair to have a preference. I think I totally understand why most people who are big fans of the franchise prefer TV Picard to movie Picard. I think most of the time when we imagine Captain Picard, we're thinking of the guy from the TV show, not the guy from the movies, because in the movies he's more of an action hero. But I don't think the fact that he is an action hero in the movies ruins his character at all, or even fundamentally changes his character. I think he's still the same guy, with the possible exception of a couple of scenes in Star Trek Nemesis where it does feel like he's really, really written significantly out of his established character. But for the most part, I don't find that to be the case in the movies, even though he is much more of an action hero because the movies are much more action oriented. Like, I don't really see why there's a problem as far as his characterization goes. Thinking Cat, do you think that Islamic unwokeness is a problem with why mainstream support for the multiple conflicts across the world, from Gaza to Sudan to Chechnya to Pakistan, as someone who has come into conflict with my gay and trans friends, being intimidated by some pretty obnoxious Sunni Muslims in Reading, Berkshire, and Holland Park, London, with the London one literally turning violent? Fortunately, both me and my trans girlfriend did judo and aikido. Oh, wow. Good for you. But the reports of how miserable life for LGBTQ people under Hamas control, let alone Iran having arrests and chemical castration based on suspicion, is there a problem with having empathy for the plight of others if they seem so counter to the liberal views we hold so dear? Potentially, and to a degree I understand it, because, yeah, you're absolutely right. Queer people who live under fundamentalist, like, Islamic rule in countries like Iran or Saudi Arabia or other parts of the world where that type of government is in control, that, yes, life is, they face horrendous persecution, and we should not be happy about that. We should not be okay with that. And if the plight of queer people living in Gaza is terrible because of the intolerance imposed on them by Hamas and by sort of a prevailing conservative interpretation of Islam, that is something that we should be worried about and we should concern ourselves with. But the question you have to ask yourself is, does that therefore mean that everybody who lives there deserves to die? And I don't think it does. I mean, you oppose genocide, you oppose ethnic cleansing, you oppose the kind of thing that is happening to the people of Gaza right now, not because you believe everybody who lives there is a wonderful, nice person who you would get along with and who shares your values. I mean, that would be nice, right? If you could say, oh, all the people of Gaza, they're all wonderful people who share our values and they're all wonderful, humane, tolerant people. That's not true. But that doesn't negate their right to exist. That doesn't negate their right to not be victimized by a ruthless war machine that is systematically wiping their society off the face of the earth. Right? Just because they have what I would consider, or just because many of them have, because not all of them do, but just because many of them have what I would consider to be absolutely reprehensible views about queer people and about people who practice religions other than the particular flavor of their religion that they practice. Like, just because they have all of these unsavory qualities in terms of their ideology and their beliefs and everything else, that doesn't mean they deserve to be wiped off the face of the earth. That doesn't mean they don't have a right to exist. That's really the fundamental question. You know, do I think they should be wiped off the face of the earth because they have retrograde, awful views on queer people? No, I don't. Do I think that the people of Iran should be wiped off the face of the earth because many of them, including the ones in control of their government, have absolutely reprehensible views about queer people? No, I don't. I think the views are reprehensible. I think the views should be resisted. I don't think people should have to live under that kind of oppression and intolerance. But does that mean I think that society should be completely wiped off the face of the earth, should be subjected to a genocide? No, I don't. And I don't think that should be like a radical statement, and I don't think it is. So yeah, I mean, it matters in its own context. It matters that we are aware of the mistreatment of LGBTQ people in Palestine under the authority of Hamas. Like, that's important, and it's important that we don't push that aside and ignore that and pretend it's not happening. But it doesn't really have any bearing on the genocide question, on the question of whether or not what Israel is doing to those people right now is okay. It doesn't make any difference. What Israel's doing to those people is wrong, whether they have shitty views on gay people or not. It doesn't make their views on gay people any less shitty or excusable in any way. But it doesn't mean that they deserve to be destroyed. Michael Blank, you need to cast the... Oh, God, one of these. You need to cast the crew of a new Star Trek show. You need to use only actors that have been lead or supporting in Batman or Superman. Who takes what position? Same in reverse. From all Star Trek main cast, who is Batman, Superman, Catwoman? Okay, first of all, there's way too many variables there. Like, I'm doing this off the cuff, okay? I'm not just going to sit here and come up with all these things like off the top of my head. So, all right, I'll just do Batman and Superman. All right. So, you need to cast the crew of a new Star Trek show. Okay. Batman would take Captain Sisko's place as the person in charge of... Oh, no, you want actors, don't you? Fuck. See, I hate these questions. I'm sorry, guys. Like, I know you. I absolutely hate these questions. I wish people would not. Thank you for being a patron. Thank you for being a supporter, Michael. I absolutely hate these questions. Christopher Reeve would take over in Captain Pike's role, and Robert Pattinson could take over as Captain Kirk in the original series. How about that? And as for the reverse, Anson Mount would be Superman, and make Avery Brooks Batman just to piss people off. I hate these questions. General Contact Unit Problem Child. I know I've already told you and Dana about this last watch-along stream, but the historical novel I'm reading has a foreword where the author briefly goes over the historical and archaeological evidence that shows in the time and place the novel is set, Dark Age Ireland, it seems like there were black traders, female Viking warriors, gay and or gender non-conforming men operating as shaman-like figures in communities. He then ends the foreword with, "This isn't just a product of my woke-addled brain. Steve, suppose you were friends with someone who wrote historical fiction and he asked you to read his latest manuscript and give your thoughts. I suspect you'd probably refuse because a book set in Dark Age Ireland with shaman-like figures is pretty close to fantasy. But supposing you didn't want, what do you think you'd say about a foreword like that when giving feedback?" Well, I would say lose the foreword. I would say the foreword serves no purpose, especially if it's a novel. Like I think when Dana and I were talking about it on the live stream where you brought this up, if you're writing like a nonfiction work that is a history of these people in this time, I guess maybe a foreword can serve some purpose in terms of kind of offering a preview to what is to come, or kind of stating some organizing principles as far as, like, what the work is going to cover and what your philosophy was in telling the story or whatever. But for a novel, for a piece of fiction, even a piece of historical fiction, there's no fucking need to write a foreword. Just my advice would be, don't write the foreword. Because honestly, and again, this is just from my perspective, I know not everybody views it this way, but if someone gives it to me to read, clearly they're interested, or presumably they're interested in my perspective. I would read it as a story. And if I were interested in a story, I would review it and evaluate it and offer my feedback to the writer who gave it to me to read in those terms, how it worked or didn't work for me as a story. Did I care about the characters? Did I believe the characters? Was I interested in the plot? Was I surprised by anything? Was I bored by anything? Do I think the parts of it that need to work? And if they don't, do I have any suggestions for how they could be made to work? Like that kind of thing. I don't give a shit how historically accurate it is. That's not my concern. Give it to somebody else. If you are concerned about vetting the historical accuracy of it, then give it to somebody else to read with that in mind. For me, if you're giving it to me to read, if it's a good story and I'm engaged by it and involved in it, I don't give a shit if there were really black people in ancient Ireland or not. Maybe there were, maybe there weren't. I don't give a fuck if it's a good story. Now, if you feel, it's like writing the forward like that, just to me smacks of apologizing for it, of saying, like, because who gives a, if people who would accuse you of having a woke addled brain for writing a story set in a historical time period that features people of color and queer people in particular roles, like anyone who would have a problem with that and call you woke addled, fuck them. Why are you preemptively responding to their criticism? Those people can go to hell. Fuck them all. Like, don't apologize for your fucking story. Write your story the way you felt it needed to be written and put it out there and let people judge for themselves. And if people think it's woke because there's black people in it, fuck them. Who gives a shit what they think? But that would be my advice. You don't need the forward. It's a novel. You don't need the forward. Orion McMurray, do you think Data's cat was just one of the many cats that were using the sets as a home? It would be interesting if this was the origin of Spot. This is a really cute idea, but all of the cats who portrayed Spot on TNG were showbiz cats. So, I mean, maybe somebody, like, I believe, I think Brent Spiner suggested that Data should have a cat. I think it might have been Brent Spiner's idea. So maybe he saw a cat on the lot one day when he was going to work, and he thought, Data should have a cat. Like, maybe that's where it came from. But the actual cats that play Spot during his/her various appearances on the show, they're all showbiz cats. Those were not cats that just happened to be living on the set. Those were trained actor cats. Cassie Volpine, it's been well established that you're 100% heterosexual. It's cool. Nobody's perfect. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your generous and tolerant attitude. But let's assume that some circumstance has been contrived which would necessitate you to engage in the sexual act of your choosing with the man of your choosing. You may be assuming to yourself that my question is, whomst do you engage with and what do you do with them? Fully consenting, of course. But what I'd like to know is, what is the outlandish situation you have found yourself in where the only possible solution is getting off with a dude? The more tortured and contrived, the better. I think all it would take is, at this point, me being stranded on a desert island for the foreseeable future with Glenn Powell. I'd be like, you know what? This is inevitable at this point. I think I made the joke on the most recent episode of Late Seating, or the uncut version of Late Seating, where we do a pre-show and a post-show just for patrons of Jason's podcast network, just for patrons of Let Me Listen. And we talk about movies we've seen since the last show, and one of the ones we both talked about was the movie Hitman on Netflix. Directed and written by Richard Linklater and starring Glenn Powell as the title character, the hitman alluded to in the title. And one of the things I said about it was, Glenn Powell should be a movie star, like a big, huge, massive main event marquee movie star. Because I said an hour into that movie, I wanted to fuck him. And as you pointed out, Cassie, I'm 100% hetero. Like, right? The Kinsey scale, I bury the needle on the hetero side, right? Completely hetero. But strand me on an island with Glenn Powell for a few months, and nature will take its course, my friend. Assuming he could, tolerate me in that way, maybe, or he was desperate enough for release or physical affection, that he would go for it. But yeah, it wouldn't take, depending on the dude, I feel like it probably wouldn't take all that tortured and contrived of a situation. David Colby, whose girlfriend does not understand the relationship he and Steve Shives share. Oh, I love that. Before I even get to the question, I'm just so enamored of the idea that your girlfriend just does not get this at all. What are you? Are you like a fan? Are you friends? What is this? What are you doing? What do you get from this? Does it ever fill you with rage how wildly bioessentialist Star Trek got in TNG, and how much worse it got as DS9 and then Voyager and God Help Us Strange New Worlds rolled around? Because holy shit, I'm into the 4th season of TNG, and I just want every single Klingon to be fed directly into a disintegration booth, since apparently they're all genetically predisposed toward being sexist, murderous thugs. Or hey, remember when Spock was turned fully human in Strange New Worlds and that somehow obliterated every cultural facet from his brain? It's not like Vulcan vegetarianism is based on some kind of ethical code or something. Nah, let's have him do LOL epic bacon memes like it's fucking 2012. Or how about how Cardassians seem to have a like 99.999% retention rate in their hideous, awful fascist society? I guess they're just genetically predisposed to enjoying criminal courts that are objectively and obviously unfair and needlessly cruel. What a great critique of fascism, Ira. You show it working. I don't get that bent out of shape about it. I think it's completely valid to criticize that about Star Trek. You're right. It is very essentialist in the depiction of the alien races. I mean, and it's always been that way. It's been that way. It was that way in TOS too. Maybe it was more prominent in the TNG era because that show ran longer and we got to see more aliens and we got to revisit the same aliens more often. Like we saw the Klingons a lot more often in TNG, not just one or two Klingon characters showing up to, bedevil Captain Kirk, but like lots and lots of Klingons. It felt like we were getting glimpses into Klingon society, and we got multiple ones of those. Same thing for the Romulans, same thing for the Cardassians, especially on Deep Space Nine, and on and on and on. So I think that's what makes it feel like it was a lot worse in those shows, but it was there in TOS as well. It's always been part of Star Trek. And I think it's completely valid to criticize that and to, to have a problem with that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really bother me. It doesn't keep me from enjoying the show or finding value in the show. And to a certain extent, I understand why they did it, even though I feel like there are better ways to do this. There are better ways to go about it. But the reason why Klingons are all a certain way and Vulcans are all a certain way and Romulans are all a certain way, et cetera, is because they represent different facets of humanity. And they're not necessarily meant to register as real people. They're meant to register as representing things, as representing parts of human nature. And if you take them on that level, it makes sense. Now, I don't think that is a sufficient reason. That's not a sufficient defense of it. I still think it's completely fine and completely valid to critique it and to criticize it and to say there are other ways of telling allegorical stories using aliens without having them all be exactly the same. But the fact that they are meant to represent things, the fact that they're meant to have an allegorical element to them, a very pronounced allegorical and metaphorical element to them, I think is an explanation for that, if not an excuse. And like I said, when I watch the show, it doesn't really bother me. Like I can talk about why it's a problem and why it is a shortcoming of the way Star Trek is written. But when I'm sitting down and watching an episode, it doesn't bother me that all Klingons. I've said before, I think Klingons are best treated as jokes anyway. I think the more absurd Klingon society is made to appear when Klingons pop up in Star Trek, the better. Like make them as over the top and ridiculous as you can possibly make them, because they're cartoon characters. So you're right, but it doesn't bother me. David, I don't give a shit. That one online communist that sometimes debates liberals, some random geek. So, Steve, you are in favor of a UBI, and I bet you wouldn't be opposed to unconditional basic services. Free housing, food, water, healthcare, electricity, utilities, internet, and access to transportation for all. However, based on my conversations with some liberals online, I get the feeling that they wouldn't be in favor of UBI or UBS. Basically, while disabled folks should have all the amenities and their needs met, anyone who is able-bodied should work and take personal responsibility. Basically, able-bodied folks must work to maintain society. Never mind the question of how do we determine who is able-bodied or not, who decides that, and how do we force those folks to work. But I want the concept of cost of living to cease to exist. I'd rather have 1,000 folks just sit on their ass and do nothing than one person starve. Steve, do you think some of your friends and audience members would be against a UBI or UBS because it would create lazy people? Oh yeah, I'm sure some of them are, but I agree. You're absolutely right. I fully support universal basic income and universal basic services. I think anything that is necessary for survival and maybe and a step beyond survival, to survive and live in a way that is tolerable, that so that life is not an undue hardship to get through. I think all of that stuff should be just provided. Like, I don't think you should have to. I loathe the idea that people are required to trade their labor for money in order to survive, not just in order to get a better situation for themselves, but to survive. Like, you will not be able to live unless you do this. I think that's a horrible standard by which to organize a society. And I think things like UBI and UBS are ways of getting around that, of sort of short circuiting that, at least for a lot of people. It wouldn't universally solve the problem completely, despite the name, but it would be a huge help to a huge number of people. And I think it should be done. And I kind of push back on the notion that nobody would want to work. I think that is a weak spot in the argument against it. I think, and a lot of otherwise very liberal progressive people who are gun shy about supporting universal basic income and similar programs because they're afraid that nobody would work and society would collapse. I feel like they're not giving people enough credit, and they're not giving people's ambition enough credit. I mean, if you lived in a society where your basic needs were all just met just by virtue of the fact that you're here and you exist. You were born, therefore you are entitled to basic needs. And you grew up in a society where everybody got those. You didn't have to work in order to put food on the table or a roof over your head or clothes on your back or have electricity or transportation or education or any of just the basic features of any humane, civilized society, right? If you lived in that world where everything on the basics was provided, then everything you earned on top of that at your job would go toward improving your situation. And are you really telling me that in that world, most people who were able to work would not work if it meant getting a nicer car or a nicer place to live or a more comfortable place to live, or or being able to live in a different area where they were more comfortable, or had conveniences that they found better than where they were before. Like, the human ambition, the human impulse, the human need to improve their situation and to provide the best life they can for themselves and their family and anybody that they care about, that would not go away if you took away the threat of, oh, you have to get a job or you'll starve. You have to get a job or you'll be out on the street. You have to get a job or you're one medical crisis away from, from death, basically. I don't think that would go away. I think people would still want to do jobs, even potentially unsavory jobs, if the pay was good enough. Like, I feel like that whole idea of, well, if people didn't live in a world where they had to work to pay their bills to survive, then nobody would work. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. I imagine myself, if I somehow came upon a massive windfall, if it turns out I have some long lost uncle that I never knew about and he dies and he leaves me $1 billion and I never have to work for the rest of my life, like I can just live off money in the bank for the rest of my life and I wouldn't have to do anything, I would still do stuff. Like, I would still, I mean, I don't work a quote unquote real job now. So it's not like I would go get a job cleaning toilets or something. I have skills and interests in, sort of the creative side of things. I would still be working. I'd be writing. I'd be making videos. I'd be doing all kinds of projects. I wouldn't just be sitting around on my ass spending the money. I mean, I might take it easy more than I do now because I could afford it. I might afford to take some time off and not work for a little while, but I'd always be getting back to work, probably before too much time had gone by, because that's just how I am. Even if I didn't need it to pay my bills and keep a roof over my head and keep the lights on, I would still do it because that's my motivation. That's my ambition. That's my drive. That's what I like to do. It's what means something to me. And I don't think most people would just, be lazy layabout bums living off of universal basic income. I think most people who were capable of working would still go out and work to improve their situation above the basic level. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. Drunken Warlock, at the end of the Discovery series finale, when the director of Section 31 was revealed to be Agent Daniels, was that the same Agent Daniels from Archer's ship, the Enterprise NX-01? And what were your thoughts on the finale of Discovery overall? Thanks. Well, I did a video about it that you can find on my channel where I go into a more lengthy expression of my opinion on the finale of Discovery and the whole final season. But yes, that was meant to be Daniels from Enterprise. He was supposed to be the same character. Like, I mean, obviously different actor. David Cronenberg was not on Enterprise, but he was meant to be the same guy. And I think it's one of the dipshittiest things they did. I was not a fan of that at all. And I mean, my sort of general thoughts on the finale of Discovery was I really wish it was better. I wish, because I like the show. For all of its problems, for all of its faults, I like the show, and I'm glad that the show was made, and I'm glad it exists. And I grew attached to some of those characters, and I wish it had gotten a better final season, and I wish it had gotten a better finale. It was quite underwhelming to me. Not like the worst thing I've ever seen. It wasn't total garbage, but it was very underwhelming. And I wish it had been better. And one of the relatively small ways I wish it had been better was I wish they had just cut out the fucking Kovach's Daniels thing, because that's just pandering fan service bullshit. Joe C. Hi, Steve. I wonder if you ever reviewed the fan fiction Star Trek Continues. I remember it being okay and well produced. I stopped watching it because of some drama concerning the lead actor. Thoughts? I have never done a video reviewing it precisely because of the drama concerning the lead actor. I am reluctant to even though he was not the only person involved, and there are lots of people who were involved in that show that did very good work, and they don't deserve to have their efforts erased because Vic Mignogna turned out to be a prick. But Vic Mignogna did turn out to be a prick. And so I'm very careful about, whenever I talk about that show because I did like it a lot. To me, it's the best fan film series I've ever seen, not just Star Trek, but of anything. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic. There are a few episodes that go into kind of, fan service memberberry territory that I'm not nuts about, but they did 11 episodes in total, and most of them are original stories that are of the kind that could have been actual Star Trek episodes. They're well written, they're well acted. Technically, they're really well made. Like if you watch it, it feels like an episode of Star Trek, just with different people playing the characters. It's really, really high quality, and I like it a lot. I think it's very impressive. And it sucks that I feel like I can't really praise it as much as I want to, because the creator and star of it turned out to be a piece of shit. But that's the situation. But yeah, I was a very big fan of Star Trek Continues when it was being made, when it was still being released, and I still think it's, for the most part, extremely well done, and I admire a lot of the craft and workmanship that went into it. And other than the unfortunate revelations about the behavior of Vic Mignogna at conventions and some of his shitty attitudes and shitty behavior toward people, other than that black mark, I think it's a terrific project and something that's really cool and that the people involved with should be very proud of. Stephen G. Clenard. Hey, Steve. There's a credible rumor going around, wink, that Star Trek Legacy will feature a season-long story arc about a journalist in 1984 confronting his past as he investigates the fate of his erstwhile pop idol, a glam rocker based on 1970s era David Bowie. I vehemently disapprove. The superfans demanding Star Trek Legacy deserve nothing less than storylines strictly based on classic TNG episodes, featuring the children of the TNG crew. According to Memory Alpha, the Enterprise D never visited a planet of 1970s glam rockers, and Alexander is not bisexual. Anyway, what's your favorite movie set in the world of 1970s glam rock and featuring characters based on Bowie, Iggy Pop, and Lou Reed? Mine is Velvet Goldmine. Fight me on this. I gots the mot. R.I.P. Willie Mays. Well, thank you for airdropping in that Willie Mays tribute at the very end. My favorite movie set in the world of 1970s glam rock and featuring characters based on Bowie, Iggy Pop, and Lou Reed. Star Trek 4. And yes, R.I.P. Willie Mays, the greatest, who until his death, the greatest living baseball player, and quite possibly the greatest baseball player, period. Like, he may have been just plain the greatest baseball player who ever lived. So, yes, his loss is a great tragedy and deeply felt by all of us baseball fans. Brian Baker. Hey, Steve, I'm having a minor surgery on Thursday, so I'm not sure if I will be present for the live show, but I'm wondering what you think Biden's approach to the debate should be. Should he call Trump a felon, or should he try to throw Trump off balance in some other way? What would your approach be to the debate and the upcoming election? I think he should do what Rocky does to Clubber in their second fight in Rocky 3 and try to intentionally provoke him and make him mad so that he punches himself out and makes mistakes and just, shows himself to be the complete blithering fool that he actually is, but just on national television in front of everybody. I feel like Biden, whether it's calling him a felon or doing other things to just kind of needle him and taunt him and provoke him to lashing out and saying angry things and going off on his wild tangents and flights of fancy, just do that. Like, provoke Trump to be as Trumpy as he can possibly be. And I feel like that will play very well on that debate, because thank God there will not be a live audience. That's something I have wished they would do for presidential debates since pretty much forever, unless the format of the debate is a town hall where they're actually taking questions from the people in the audience. and that's usually a relatively small audience, there is no reason why a presidential debate should be done in a theater with an audience of like 1,000 people. That is ridiculous, especially with a character like Trump, who will do things to intentionally rile up and get his supporters in the audience to cheer and yell and carry on and give the impression that he's dominating and he's winning the debate in a room with no audience, just a sound stage. Trump doing his ranting, maniacal conspiracy theorist persecution complex act to dead silence. I feel like that's the best case scenario. So that's what I think Biden should do. Andy Lawler. Hey, Steve, in your recent video about Beyond being the template for any new Trek series, you mentioned that these shows, announced, upcoming, or future, should minimize the inclusion of legacy characters outside of those established in the era in which a particular show is set. As Starfleet Academy is already known to be set in the Disco era, how many Discovery characters making appearances would be excessive in your estimation? Though not formally announced, to my knowledge, they drove pretty hard to the hoop that Tilly will be an instructor and thus likely to appear, if not as a main cast member, at least making guest or recurring appearances. Though he left Starfleet in his role as a Federation ambassador, it also seems organic for Saru to show his face from time to time. It's not outside the realm of acceptability to have Discovery herself show up occasionally. Even if the writers have good reasons, how many guest spots would be a crutch? I think anything beyond Tilly is a crutch. I love Saru. Saru is my favorite character from Discovery. Saru is one of my favorite characters from this entire current era of Star Trek. I love Saru. I love Doug Jones as Saru. And look, if they came up with a good reason for Saru, if Saru shows up in Starfleet Academy and it's a really good episode, I'm not going to complain. But as a concept, no, if Tilly is going to be in the show, because they've set that up ahead of time. They planned ahead and thought, okay, we're going to do a Starfleet Academy spinoff. Let's move Tilly in that direction so she can be a part of that show. I think that's completely fine. But other than that, I don't want to be seeing, I want to see the characters on this show. Like I want Starfleet Academy to be Starfleet Academy, not a vehicle to see Discovery characters. Like Discovery's over. Right? Just like I didn't necessarily want to see TNG people showing up on Deep Space Nine. Now, it happened every once in a while. There was the Thomas Riker episode, and of course, Worf came on as a regular eventually. But I didn't want to see a bunch of TNG people showing up on Deep Space Nine. And you could say, well, it's organic because it's the same era and the Enterprise could have been on its way somewhere else. Okay, yes, you can always think up reasons to justify it in world, but that's not really the point, is it? The point is that show should be allowed to be its own thing. And if you start a new show and you keep bringing on characters from the last show, then you're not letting the new show be the new show. It's just a vehicle for guest appearances from people on the old show. And I'm not inspired by that. I'm not excited by that. I don't want to see that. I don't give a shit. Discovery's over. I love Saru, but Discovery's over. So tell me a new story with new characters. And yeah, so to me, anything beyond Tilly is a crutch. And like if it was a good enough episode and they brought Saru on or something for like a one-time deal and it was a really good episode, yes, they can get away with it, just like TNG got away with it with Scotty and Spock, just like Deep Space Nine got away with it with Riker. Yes, you can get away with it. It's possible to do it and have it, work out. But as a rule, I just think it's a terrible idea and counterproductive. Oasis. Hey, Steve, I've had Duet on my mind a lot lately, especially with the Gaza genocide so prominent in the news, even if they don't call it what it is. My question is, since Cardassians are the space Nazis of Star Trek, does Eamon Maritza count as a good Nazi? We talked about Damar and Garrick in that context. Maybe Maritza is also in that context as well. Cheers. Yeah, I think so. And I think that's ultimately the point of that episode, is that even though, and it's more interesting to not just to say, well, Maritza was a good Nazi, but to talk about why, like what made him a good Nazi. And in his case, it's not, he didn't do anything to thwart what the Cardassians were doing to the Bajorans at the time. You know, he wasn't a good Nazi in the sense that he was trying to be Oscar Schindler and kind of, you know, undermine the campaign against the Bajorans using whatever little power and influence he had. He didn't do anything. He went along with it. And he hated it, and he knew it was wrong at the time. And he talks about how, you know, he would cry himself to sleep because he could hear the screams of people being mistreated in the camp. And he didn't do anything about it, and he didn't leave. He didn't protest. He didn't, you know, he just went along with it. And he hates himself for that. He feels incredibly guilty for that, you know. And so he decides to try and do something about it later in his life by pretending to be this notorious war criminal and to try and get the Bajoran government to execute him, thinking he is that war criminal, as some kind of symbolic sacrifice to force the Cardassian government to fully admit the level of wrongdoing they perpetrated on the Bajorans. So it's not what he did during the time of the occupation that makes him a good Nazi. It's what he tries to do to make up for it after the fact. It's that he doesn't only want to take responsibility for his own inaction. He wants to force his government to take responsibility for what they did. You know, that's what makes him, quote unquote, a good Nazi. So not just, well, he was a nice guy and he didn't like the occupation. It's how he allows his guilt over what he did during the occupation to motivate him after the fact. And yes, I do think Maritza would count as a good Nazi. Agent Meister, the chronicler of an age yet to come. Peldor Joy, Steve, you've made no secret that you have always been less than impressed with Voyager and Enterprise. While I love these two areas of the Trek franchise myself, I can see where you're coming from. But I always try to find the good in everything. Well, most things anyway. That doesn't include braying orange-haired jackasses running for the highest office in the land. So, Steve, is there anything, any aspect of Voyager or Enterprise that stands out in a good way? Something positive and unique about each show that other shows in the Trek franchise lack and are worse off for it? When I asked myself this, I immediately thought of the special effects. God knows TOS would have benefited from that, but can you think of anything else? I know I'm kind of sort of sneaking in two questions by asking you about each show, but both questions share a similar thematic resonance or something. Also, R.I.P. Donald Sutherland. A great light has gone out. Yes, indeed. Not only did we lose Willie Mays, like 2 days later, we lost Donald Sutherland, one of the greatest actors of his generation. A guy who, if you look at his filmography, you'll see some like classic movies and a lot of like just totally forgettable movies. But a lot of totally forgettable movies with one really good performance, and it's by Donald Sutherland. He was one of those actors that improved every single thing he was in. And he was an amazing actor, an amazing voice, amazing presence, incredible way of acting with his eyes when he would look at people in the scene with him. Like it seemed like he was really seeing them. You know, he wasn't just watching them and waiting for his turn to talk. Like he was there in the scene as the character, really seeing the other person. He was a remarkable actor. But as for Voyager and Enterprise, well, Enterprise, it's easy because it's the aesthetic. I love the aesthetic of Enterprise. I love the set design. I love the way the ship looks. I love the lower tech feel of it. I love that there are, you know, instead of touch screens, it's physical switches and buttons. I love that they have to push a button for the door to open. The doors don't open automatically. I love the fact that they have a grappling hook on the ship instead of a tractor beam. I love all just the lower tech, slightly more grounded technology and just the general aesthetic of the ship. I love the way the Enterprise, that version of the Enterprise looks. It feels like an actual ship. Not exactly. It's still a fantasy. It's still a little, the hallways are still a little too wide and it's still a little too roomy to be an actual spacecraft, but or an actual submarine, but it's a lot closer to that than other Star Trek ships have been. And it evokes that a lot better. And I like that. I like the feeling that it's a real ship, that this is a tin can in space. You know, I think that's a really cool aesthetic for a sci-fi show to have. And Enterprise got that more so than I think any other Star Trek show has. As for Voyager, I mean, it's a little bit of a cheat because I can say this about every Star Trek show, but the thing about Voyager that never fails is it does have a really, really terrific cast. Those are really good actors. Kate Mulgrew is a terrific actor. Um, I think he's a little one note as Tuvok, but Tim Russ is a terrific actor. Robert Picardo is great. Jerry Ryan, when she joins the show as Seven, is great. And Robert Duncan McNeil is terrific. And they almost never get material worthy of their talents, but they're all obviously very talented and very game actors. I mentioned this in my retro review that went up yesterday of the Voyager episode Unity. I mean, they have to deal with just such banal, meaningless dialogue and try to say it in a way that sounds like something somebody would say, and that's tough. That's tough. Like, what do you do when you're trying to play a particular character with a definable personality in a show, and you as the actor are trying to do this in a way that maintains some consistency because you want this to feel like a real person to people who watch at home, and they give you a line that is so just utterly bland and colorless. It doesn't sound like anything your character would say, doesn't sound like anything anybody would say. It's a terrible, terrible line. And you have to do something with it. Like, you have to impart some character to this limp, meaningless line. And they don't always do it on Voyager, but they're always trying. Like, they're always doing their best. And I admire that. So with Voyager, I mean, there are things about the premise of the show that I like, that are promising, but I don't think it really is fair to point that out as a good thing because the show so rarely takes advantage of it. I mean, there are things about Voyager that could have been great and could have set it apart from the other shows, but they almost never made the show about those things. But it did have a terrific cast. Isaiah Taylor. So here's my Moths movie poster design. The top of the poster includes a typical starry night and a yellowish white crescent moon in the left-hand portion of the poster. Pan down to the middle and we see a person in a semi-skimpy red bikini lying down, only legs, torso, and upper midriff clothed seen. And at the bottom of the figure, her body is being covered by tiny moth silhouettes in blacks, reds, and whites. Framing in the center will be a hulking moth head with bulging reddish-orange glowing compound eyes with glowing neon red drool running down its new fangs and proboscis. At the very bottom is a night scene at a campground as the drool falls down in between. The main title, Moths, appears in a small red, seemingly fancy font with the tagline, cute, fuzzy, and deadly. Thoughts, Steve? Also, all done with my cosplay. You'll see the final project soon. Well, I'm looking forward to that. The poster sounds good as far as I can picture it in my mind. It sounds like a very classic, like 1980s monster movie style poster, if I'm picturing it correctly. So I dig it. I think it's that, especially like the different, it's like a campground at the bottom, but then it kind of fades to a different perspective in the middle. Like, there's a lot of classic movie posters that are like that. It's like they use the space of the poster to sort of depict different locations and different times, and it all kind of fades from one thing to another. That's a very classic movie poster design technique. It sounds cool. Kara Hughes. Hi, Steve. As I mentioned when we watched the last DS9 episode, it's fascinating how well the series still holds up even years after it was first broadcast, especially as they are reshowing it on one of the Freeview Sky channels. But although some people have said that Major Kira is the one who undergoes the most character development, I sometimes wonder if this isn't quite the case. Remember, at first, Sisko is totally against Nog associating with Jake. In the third episode, he even semi-threatens Jake with disciplinary action if he hears of him and Nog seeing one another again. So can you say that all the characters in DS9 undergo some character development and become more fully rounded characters, or is it just me? Would like to hear your thoughts on this, as I think all the characters move from being just cardboard cutouts to full human beings. Or is it just my perspective? But I would love to hear your thoughts anyways, Kara. No, you're absolutely right. That's one of the things that makes Deep Space Nine my favorite Star Trek show. is that all of the major characters experience some growth and some character development. All of them. And a lot of the recurring characters do as well. Like you mentioned, Nog. Nog is not a regular. Nog is a recurring character. He actually only appears in a fraction of the total episodes. But he has one of the biggest and most satisfying character arcs of anyone on that show. Same thing for Rom. Rom is not in that many more episodes than Nog. It might be, I haven't looked it up recently. It might be roughly the same. Like Rom is not in the majority of episodes. He's a recurring character, and he has an incredibly satisfying character arc that carries him through really substantial changes as the series goes on. So he's another example. Even relatively static characters like Odo go through some development. Chief O'Brien goes through some development. Not radical, like he's not a completely different person at the end of the show than he is at the beginning. But he has grown and changed a little bit. And there have been, episodes that have pushed him in different directions and changed him a little. And yeah, every character is like that. So do I think it might be fair to say that Kira changes the most out of all of the lead characters, all of the regulars? I think that might be fair. Yeah, because Kira does start out, because Kira changes in multiple ways. Kira develops on several different axes, along the run of the show. But it's not fair to say that Kira is the only one who changes. And I don't know if anybody said that. They said that Kira changes the most, and I think it's fair to say among the regulars, Kira changes the most, or at least there's a good argument for that. I don't think it's an open and shut case. There's a good argument to be made that Kira changes the most. But they all change, and they all grow, and they're all dynamic characters, and that's one of the things that for me makes it such a great show. Shazy, good evening, Steve. To what extent do you allow yourself to be fatalistic when trying to improve society? In other words, accepting that historically things have had to get much worse for enough people to actually want to change things for the better. Can you please articulate what value you see in trying to improve society in the here and now, despite being acutely aware of the complacency in so many people? My perspective is that not actively working for a better future leaves downtrodden people vulnerable to being seduced by the far right, enabling and amplifying destructive forces inherent in humanity, such as xenophobia, homophobia, sexism, transphobia, and so on. Thank you. I agree with you. While I do think it's true that really, really significant, usually positive historical change has been motivated by things getting really, really bad in the immediate time leading up to that change. While I agree that has been a pattern throughout history, I don't think that should ever be an excuse to not try to make things better any chance you get in the here and now. You can say like, well, we can, things aren't really going to improve until things get, a whole lot worse. Therefore, we should hope they get worse so that they'll then get better. That's just an inhuman way to look at it. What about the people who will suffer and die during the downturn, before the hopefully following upturn, right? What about that? And assuming the downturn and the period of very bad fortune is inevitable before the good fortune starts to happen, shouldn't we be working in the midst of the bad fortune to help as many people as possible and to mitigate all of the suffering and death and what have you that we can? Like if the bad stuff is inevitable, we should at least be trying to make the bad stuff as, to sort of counteract it as much as we can, right? Yeah, just the whole idea of, well, we should actually hope that things get worse because then they'll get better after that. It's a really bloodless, it's the mindset of seeing everything as though it's like a thought experiment, or seeing everything as though it's like a movie you're watching and not an actual reality that people will have to experience. I do not want to see the suffering of people increase because, well, after it increases for a while, eventually things will get better. Enough people will get fed up and then things will get better. Yeah, maybe, perhaps. It's happened before, but that doesn't mean I should hope that more people suffer. Like that's a horrible, horrible thing to hope for. And I would never hope for that. And I would certainly never use that as a justification for not trying to make things better right now. No, not at all. Wolfie Basach, hi Steve. Whilst grinding away this very Monday in the workplace I affectionately call hell, I received a message from Central Command. There's a seagull pissing off the outside diners. It's your job to get rid. Lethal force has been approved. Now, I know this seagull, and know it well. Me and the seagull have had serious beef in the past, and I'm not in for an easy time. If you can imagine a slightly less ugly Marjorie Taylor Greene with a beak, then it sums this fucker up. So far this week, up until the time of writing, buckets of water, crashing dustbin lids, and eagle mimicry have not liberated our ever-complaining, overindulged, middle-class clientele from afternoon tea interference. And so my question is, what do you think I should do about the obnoxiously gluttonous and greedy nightmare that's been forced upon me? Also, if you can think about what I can do about the fucking seagull, that'd help too. That's exactly the punchline I hoped you were building towards, and you did not disappoint. Well done, my friend. Well done. I think the next time someone complains about the seagull, you should say, well, we've just hired the seagull, and now my shift is almost over, so the seagull will be coming to see to your needs very soon. I would say that. I mean, I understand that, like, it's frustrating if there is essentially a wild animal, like, causing trouble for your customers. Like, I get why it's a problem and why you'd want to get rid of the seagull, but, like, what are you supposed to do? The lethal force has been authorized. What do they want you to do? Like, go out there and strangle it? That's not your job. You know, you're not a hunter. You're not animal control. Fucking call it. Is there such a thing as animal control? Fucking call animal control. If it's that much of a problem, if it's an irreconcilable conflict between the seagull and the customers, call someone to come. Call someone from whatever the local authority is to come and get the fucking thing and take it somewhere else. Like, it's not your job. Maybe it might be your job to make the call, but it's not your job to go out there and try to fucking scare it away or kill it or whatever. Like, that's what I would say. It's not my fucking job. It's not my fucking job to go get rid of a seagull. I was not trained for this, you know? MW Ridra, happy Friday, Steve. Had an argument in an online writers group last night, and I was curious on your take. Where do you think the line is between seeking out critique of your work and writing by committee? Hope all is well. I think where that line is defined by your purpose in soliciting feedback from people and the way you apply it to your writing. I think the best way for a writer to deal with feedback, especially in the midst of the creative process, like if you're giving something to people to read that is unfinished, like you haven't published it or submitted it to be published, you're still in the process of writing it, and you're giving it to someone just to say, hey, you know, what do you think of this? Like, what's your take on this? Give me some notes, right? You should be open and receptive and thoughtful about criticism that comes to you from people whose opinion you trust and who get what you're trying to do with the story, right? You show it to someone who you think is kind of the kind of person that the audience that you think would enjoy the story, or they're kind of like you, and you figure if you like it, they'll like it or whatever. And you just want an extra set of eyes, and you want to know, does this work? And is this line okay? And what about this character? I'm not sure about this character. Does her motivations make sense, et cetera, et cetera. You show it to people who get what you're trying to do. And then they can tell you from their perspective if they think you pulled it off or not. And that kind of feedback is incredibly valuable for a writer. If you show it to someone whose opinion you trust, who gets what you're trying to do in the story, and they read it and they come back to you and they say, you know what? I don't think this really works. And here's why. right? That's an opinion you should take seriously. Doesn't necessarily mean you should just blindly do whatever they say, but you should take that seriously and consider that and maybe use that to guide any changes you might decide to make. It would be writing by committee if you just sort of submitted it to people and said, just tell me if you like this or not. And then based on their feedback, you changed the story for no other reason than you just wanted them to like it better. You know, I feel like there's a big difference there. There's a difference between soliciting feedback and and taking in feedback for the purpose of, okay, let me find out if when I show this to an audience, when I show this to someone who didn't write it, do they understand what I'm trying to do with this story? Do they get the point I'm trying to make? Do all the beats that I hoped would land with them the way I hoped they would? Does it work the way I'm trying for it to work? That kind of thing. That's not only acceptable, that's absolutely essential, I think, for a writer. And that's not writing by committee. Writing by committee is, oh, you didn't like it? What should I do to fix it? Okay, and then you fix it because for no other purpose than you want the people who read it to like it, right? It's a different thing. I don't think you should just uncritically accept any notes and any advice and any critique and say, well, okay, then I'll change this and then you'll like it better, right? Like that's, you know, that's not a good way to accept criticism. Like it should still be your story and your vision and what you're trying to accomplish with it. You shouldn't change it just because someone who read it didn't like it. If someone who read it had a critique that was based on thinking that something you were trying to do in the story didn't work, and they can give you specifics for what didn't work about it for them, then that's different. That, you know, but yeah, I agree that you should avoid you should avoid writing by committee in your writing, and that should not be the purpose of a writers group or of soliciting feedback from anybody. Dana, during this past trek, actually, you mentioned that when you started at Shepherd University, you initially chose an education focus and that you soon changed to creative writing. I would love to know more about that. First of all, what led you to decide on an education major? Did you have any education classes? What do you remember from them or about the instructors? And what was it that made you go, oh, nope, not for me, so quickly? I had two education classes. One was just sort of an introduction to education course, and the other was a tutoring class where we would tutor students. And the tutoring, I mean, the tutoring was all right. Like I didn't hate it. Wasn't my favorite thing, but I thought it was fine. But the education class was more focused on things like, you know, introduction to different kinds of pedagogy and you know, classroom management and just, how to approach a classroom in terms of like teacher and versus student dynamics, that kind of thing. Just sort of more of like the technical stuff that you need to know how to do as a teacher. And the reason I chose an English education major to start with was purely out of concern of, oh, when I get through with this degree, I'm going to need to use it to get a job and pay the bills. And at the time I thought, oh, I'll get an English degree. I'm probably never going to be a published writer, at least not, you know, frequently enough or successfully enough for that to be my full-time job. And I'm not even sure if that's what I want. So fuck it. I'll be a teacher, right? It was purely about like, what's my job going to be? Because when I started that, full-time YouTuber was not really an option. I started doing YouTube while I was still in college. And by the time I was finished college, I was successful enough at it that I did think, oh, this can be my job. And it didn't really matter what my degree was in, although I'm very glad that I got an English education. And I think it informs pretty much everything I do on this YouTube channel. I'm incredibly grateful for my time at Shepherd and HCC before that. But, you know, in terms of, you know, I don't have the job I have because I got an English education, you know. But at the time I thought, well, I'm going to have to, you know, I'm going to have to use this to get a job. And I thought teaching would be the best bet. And then once I actually took the classes, it became real to me. And I realized, oh, this is a thing I'll actually have to do on a daily basis. and it just wasn't for me. Like, I'm just not cut out to be a teacher. You know, I think I'm a pretty good public speaker. I think I'm pretty good in terms of like explaining things and delivering messages and lessons to people and educating people in certain ways. Like I feel like I do that sometimes in my videos, but actually being a teacher in a classroom to students every day for the next 30 years until I retire, like I realized, oh, that's not what I want to do with my life. I'm not going to be good at that. I'm not going to enjoy that. That's not where whatever skills or talents I may have are going to be put to the best use. This is just not for me. So I changed to a creative writing concentration instead of an education concentration. Air One Fire, who says, I would rather quit Starfleet than wear a disgusting gray jacket. Oh, this motherfucker. Hi, Steve. I listened to the late seating review of Phantom Menace and agreed with everything, but then watched the movie and loved it. It's probably the worst thing that I love. What are some of the worst things that you love, aside from those uniforms? The uniforms, man. The Room. The movie The Room. God, I love that. I love everything about that movie. It is an absolutely awful movie. It is completely indefensible under conventional terms as a movie. It's badly written. It's badly acted. It's competently directed. I mean, it's not, the only thing about it is like, in terms of the actual technical filmmaking, there are some weird little quirks in there, but it's not like outrageously bad on a technical level. It's not remarkable. It's not what I would call especially good, but it's not incompetent. But everything else about it, and it's not just that it's incompetent. It's just, it's bad in such fascinatingly peculiar ways. And it's the most endlessly fascinating and endlessly rewatchable bad movie I think I've ever seen. And there are a lot of bad movies that I love and love to watch. Part of that is sort of a side effect of my affection for Mystery Science Theater 3000, and the fact that because I watched so much MST3K and internalized that, like I can watch a bad movie and watch it with that point of view and be making fun of it and cracking jokes about it and enjoy it on that level, even if the movie itself is absolutely rotten. There are a lot of those, but The Room is in a class by itself. The Room is my favorite bad movie, and it's a movie that, even though in terms of actual artistic qualities, it has almost none that are of any significant value, judged by conventional standards, but it is a movie that I could watch right now at the drop of a hat, and I would love it as much as I have loved it every other time of the dozens and dozens and dozens of times I have watched it before. So yeah, The Room may very well be the worst thing that I actually genuinely love. And final question from Russell. Hey, Steve. Well, I just got home and didn't have a lot of time to prepare, so what I want to ask you will wait for 2 weeks. I'm going to ask you a generalized Borg question. I know you don't like it and you feel it's watered down, but wouldn't Hugh being like a virus to many Borgs lead to the stories we get in Descent and Voyager as a whole? Is it really bad writing? Because I think the attempt is there, especially when you consider the first season of Picard. There is the Unimatrix two-parter, which I enjoyed. I don't know, maybe you have a different take. Curious on your thoughts. I will agree throwing the Borg in the finale, while I like Alice Krieg, was most likely a mistake and a way to take cheap shots at the Borg. Anyway, see you shortly. I mean, by the time they got to the finale, I don't think using the Borg was a mistake because the Borg had become so entrenched in the show. So by the time they got that far, it's like, fuck, you might as well use them for the finale. You've established them as the recurring nemesis of the show, even though like they're not good. Like they're a really, really weak pushover nemesis, but they're, you know, they're the main villains of the series at this point. So you might as well use them in the finale. I disagree with you that Hugh does anything to rehabilitate the writing of the Borg after that. And this kind of goes back to something I said earlier about, well, yeah, you can, about like the cameos from, or the guest appearances from legacy characters in later shows. You can always justify it. You can always make up an excuse for why it makes sense. You can always say, oh, it's organic to the story because these people would know each other because of XYZ. So therefore, it's completely fine for a character from this show to just randomly pop up on this other show, right? You can always do that. You can always make those excuses and make it feel like it's justified. But for me, what it always comes down to is, what does this do for the show? This is a show. This is not a real world. This is a television show or a movie sometimes. And you're telling a story, and you want to tell the best story you can. And even though you can say, well, they let Hugh back to the collective, and maybe Hugh's spreading of his individuality had, some effects beyond the group of Borg we see in Descent. Maybe part of the reason why the Borg became such pushovers in Voyager is because you had something to do with that. But how does that help the story? Like, and I got a question, I got a comment on my retro review of Unity that I saw just a little while before I started this live stream, from someone who says, actually, I think the fact that the Borg became less of a threat in the later seasons of Voyager because Voyager developed better ways of fighting them, I think that's actually good writing, because it shows that the Voyager was able to adapt. And, and I just, and it's good that the Federation and Starfleet came up with ways to defeat the Borg, because the Borg were a terrible threat to the Federation and they would have killed a lot of people. So it's good that they developed ways to defend against them. They're not real people. The Federation's not a real place. Starfleet's not a real service. Yeah, okay, if the Federation was a real place and the Borg were a real threat, and those real people actually, came up with a good way to defeat their formerly undefeatable enemy, and now they've developed new technology and new strategies to defeat the bad guys and save lives and prevent their civilization from being destroyed, sure, if it was real, that's a great development. It's not real. It's a story. How does it help a story to have weak villains? It doesn't. Action adventure stories are almost always structured with the heroes facing some kind of challenge or some kind of threat. And often that is embodied as a villain or group of villains, or sometimes it's a more, disembodied threat. But the point is, it's always it's the heroes facing down a threat and trying to overcome it, trying to overcome a challenge. That's the source of conflict in the story, right? That's the hurdle that the heroes have to get over in order to achieve their goal. That's essentially what the story is. That's what animates it. That's what makes it go. And if you're trying to tell a story like that, and Star Trek almost always tells stories in that format, regardless of whether there are actual personal villains or not, that's almost every Star Trek episode is structured in that classical sense of heroes come up against a challenge or face down a threat and have to overcome it or have to solve a problem. That's basic storytelling. And if you have a villain in your show that started out as this faceless, terrifying villain that cannot be negotiated with and cannot be overcome through the standard means, and is able to overwhelm everything your heroes can do, that's automatic. If you can present them in a way where that is convincing, like the Borg were initially, that's a great villain. That's a compelling villain, because the question that comes into the minds of your audience is, how are they going to get out of this one? You've gotten us to believe that the Borg are unbeatable. So how's Captain Picard and Commander Riker and the rest of our heroes on the Enterprise, how are they going to get out of this? Are they going to win or escape or whatever? There's inherent interest there. If you then, over the course of several more appearances, water down the Borg to the point where there's no longer any tension about whether or not the good guys are going to win, it's just become, they're just villains of the week. And you don't know exactly how Captain Janeway and her crew are going to defeat the Borg this time, but you're not worried about it because a few episodes ago, you saw Voyager blow up 3 Borg cubes all by itself. And it really didn't seem like that big of a deal. Once you've gotten to that point, it doesn't matter if you can say, oh, but the reason the Borg are like this now is because of this thing that happened in another episode a few years ago. It doesn't matter. They're a weak villain. That's the important part. Whether there's an in-universe explanation for them being shitty villains doesn't make them less shitty villains. The problem isn't that they're shitty villains for no reason. The problem is that they're shitty villains. Yeah. And it's just, I think a lot of it is the product of, I approach it as a TV show. I approach it as a drama. I approach it as a work that I am evaluating as an audience member and as a critic. And a lot of fans, and, you know, good for them. This is just the way they engage with the show. They view it as though it's real. And they look at the Federation and Starfleet as real organizations. And they think, oh, they figured out a way to reliably defeat the Borg. Good for them. And all I see is a loss of opportunity to tell interesting stories about those characters. Because I know it's not real. And I don't give a shit if it's real or not, as long as the story I'm watching is compelling and holds my interest and makes me care about what happens. And if you have the Borg at a place where, you know, the hero ship on the show can defeat them while barely breaking a sweat, then I'm past caring. Why should I care? Why should I care? So anyway, that's my little soapbox rant about that. Thank you for the question. Thanks everybody for the questions. And now, before I turn my full attention to the live chat, it's time to premiere another brand new Stuffy and Friends short. Now, as always, this short will go up as a standalone YouTube short on this channel tomorrow. But because you are watching right now on Ask Away, you get to see it in full frame version instead of the square version that will go up as a short tomorrow before anybody else. So please do now enjoy this brand new, never before seen Stuffy and Friends short. I must have revenge.
Don't overreact.
Go on.
I went to the drive-thru at Sheetz today, and in addition to my veggie and cheese sub, seasoned curly fries, and Coke Zero, I ordered a Cinnabon muffin. However, when I pulled up to the first window to pay for my food, I was informed that the customer ahead of me in line had just purchased the last one, and I was forced to accept a blueberry muffin instead. And so I say again, I must have revenge.
What sort of revenge?
I'm not sure. Maybe find out where they live and steal their Amazon packages? I wrote down their license plate.
Oi, stall it. You're not talking about some victimless crime, like shoplifting or planting a car bomb. You run up on the wrong porch, you're likely to get your full head blown off.
True. And then you two would have to seek revenge for me. How would you seek revenge for me?
Let's just move on.
Ta-da! Hope you like that one. All right, let's turn to the live chat and see what everybody's talking about. I saw someone mention something about Voyager a little bit. Ethan says there are a lot more funny, wacky episodes in Voyager than the other series, and I like that. That's true, and like I'm very quick to point out, especially to people who characterize my view on Voyager as me hating the show. There are quite a few good Voyager episodes. I think they are the exception rather than the rule for the series, but there are episodes of Voyager that are really good. And one of those episodes is an episode I reviewed on my retro review series not all that long ago, which is the Bride of Chaotica, the Captain Proton episode. That's a fun episode. You know, it's not a masterpiece. It's not something that you're going to remember on your deathbed, but it's a fun, entertaining episode that pays very clever tribute to, 1930s and 40s sci-fi adventure serials, which is right in my sweet spot. That's something that I really enjoy. And the show does a good job of evoking a lot of the sense of those serials. And it's a really good episode. And Voyager has a couple of episodes like that. They're not all of the wacky variety, but they're just solid episodes, so it's not like it's all garbage. I don't think it is. you know. Dana, how would they seek revenge? I guess I have my question for next Ask Away. I would love for you to ask that. How would they seek revenge for me? John Stewart says most of the shows have the trope of the overwhelming villain and the heroes always mostly find a way to win. Do you feel that after a villain is defeated, they shouldn't reoccur? Well, it depends on the nature of the villain. There are lots of villains whose appeal does not rest purely in how difficult they are to defeat, right? Like Gul Dukat in Deep Space Nine is a great example. Gul Dukat's appeal as a villain and the legitimacy of his threat isn't so much that he always wins. It's more about his intellect and his personality and his deceitfulness and also, just his own personal qualities, his ego and the fact that he sees himself in this heroic way when he's not. There's all kinds of fascinating characteristics of Dukat as a character that make him a great villain. And make him the kind of villain that, as long as you have good stories for him, you can keep bringing him back again and again and again. The reason why I have a problem with the Borg being used that way is the Borg are fairly one-dimensional villains, and I don't say that as an insult in this case. The first couple of Borg episodes of TNG are fantastic. And one of the things that makes them so fantastic is that the Borg are so overwhelmingly threatening. Like the first Borg episode in season 2, when Q-Who, when they first encounter the first cube, there's something about the Borg that is otherworldly. They seem a lot more alien than other Star Trek aliens. They're remote. You can't talk to them. You can't negotiate with them. They don't respond to any of the standard techniques. And they're so powerful that the Enterprise cannot win in a fight with them and can't even get away from them until Q shows up and helps them. So they seem just incredibly dangerous. And that's their appeal. That's what makes them compelling, is the fact that they are incredibly dangerous, basically faceless adversaries that present an overwhelming threat that you just don't know how the good guys are going to deal with, right? And even in Best of Both Worlds, like they get out of it by the skin of their teeth, and they suffer incredible losses. Like one Borg ship destroys an entire fleet of Starfleet ships and gets to Earth and almost conquers Earth, except the Enterprise crew is able to defeat the ship just by the skin of their teeth because they're able to get Captain Picard back and sort of exploit some flaws that he opens up to them, and they're able to defeat that ship, right? After that, I would have been very, very, very careful about ever seeing the Borg again. And like I've said in reviews of other Borg episodes, they get away with it with iBorg because it's just Hugh. It's not the Borg collective that they're opposed by. It's more a story of, oh, what would happen if a member of the Borg collective got separated from it? And would their individuality start to return? And what would that mean for them? And how would the Enterprise crew deal with that? And, you're telling a story featuring the Borg, and allowing you to humanize them to a point, or to add some complexity to them, but not in a way that diminishes the larger threat. The only thing that really diminishes the larger threat of the Borg is when we see them lose. Because when the unbeatable villain gets beat, well, they're not the unbeatable villain again. And if they get beat once, that might not be so bad. But then they get beat a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time. And pretty soon it's like, oh, every time they meet these guys, they either defeat them or at the very least are able to get away without too much problem. And then all of a sudden you've ruined your villains. Because the Borg are those kind of villains. They are not Gul Dukat style villains. They are villains that are compelling because of the threat they present, because of the apparently insurmountable obstacle they put in front of the heroes. And the more the heroes get over that obstacle, the less insurmountable it is and the less interesting it is. 255 AD says, I play with ChatGPT when I'm bored. It almost always gives stories a happy ending. I've asked it about that, and it admitted that it does it because humans like happy endings. Do you think it's worrying capitalists want to replace human writers with a thing that's entire approach to story writing is just making a writer, reader, listener happy? Well, yeah, because I don't think that should be the approach even when humans are writing it. You know, I think it's worrying that certain people in the entertainment industry want to replace writers with AI, regardless of their aims or regardless of the type of writing that the AI does or the philosophy that underpins the AI's writing or whatever. I think it's troubling no matter what. And I think believing that stories should have happy endings because that's what people like, I think that's a problem whether humans do it or robots do it. Let me catch a couple of super chats here. Kirak says, Steve, I know Trek is fictional. Not so sure why you think I think it's real life. I was asking about the story content. I mean, if it was real, Voyager would have gotten their ass assimilated. In terms of story, I think it makes for some interesting telling from the perspective of the liberated Borgs. Also, change in a story isn't always bad. Well, I'm not necessarily saying that you think it's real, but the approach that a lot of people that I was talking about take is the approach of they're treating it as though it is real, and they are responding to the creative choices made by the writers based on how it affects the people living in the story world as though they were real people living in a real world. And yeah, of course, change in a story is very good. It just depends on the change. You know, not all change is good, but change in a story is good. And like a story should change from beginning to end. A story as it's being told, a story should change. It just needs to change in ways that make it a better story. Hey, Carlisle. Good to see you. Isaiah Taylor says, my next project is designing and building a fictitious four-funneled canard steamship model named RMS Cappadocia. She was laid down in 1909 in Alt Universe. Well, good for you, man. Go for it. David Colby says, I think if Voyager had good Borg episodes, people would remember them much more fondly. Well, sure. Of course. Of course they would. Yes, I agree. Absolutely. Joe McClory says, do you think a defeated Borg and what could morally be done with a foe that could not be reasoned with make for good stories if they were going to defang them? Oh, yeah, that would be a much better way to do it than to continually present them as adversaries that we know are just going to get their asses kicked. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's another option they could have done. And the frustrating thing, they flirted with this in the Picard series, especially in season 1, where, okay, if you want to keep telling Borg stories for whatever reason, if the Borg are just the bad guys you can't let go, and you're doing a new Star Trek show and you're like, I want to do Borg stuff. Okay, find a different approach. And one of the different approaches that they tried in season 1 of Picard was, what about ex-Borg? You know, what about people who used to be Borg and then for whatever reason, through whatever means, they found themselves separated from the collective. They were de-assimilated, but they still have Borg technology embedded in their bodies that can't be safely removed. They still visibly look like Borg, even though they, you know, have regained their individuality and they don't really think of themselves as drones anymore. But, you know, some of them have suffered injuries and are debilitated in ways due to their assimilation and then being separated from the collective. And they have all kinds of personal issues and health issues to deal with. And plus, there's a huge segment of Federation society that doesn't trust them and views them as a threat and views them as just an inherently unwelcome segment of their society. That's a fresh angle. And that is a very socially relevant angle. Like, you can use that to tell socially relevant stories that would be pertinent to our present moment, which is the kind of thing that Star Trek should be doing. So it's a great idea and a great fresh use of the Borg. They're not the villains anymore, you know, but you can still tell stories with them from a completely different approach. That's fine if you can come up with good stories for that. Like, the idea of that is very good. It's the idea of, oh, once we've seen them lose 20 times in a row, why should I care about them coming to face down the Starship Voyager the 21st time? You know, when we saw them 2 or 3 times and we saw our heroes barely get away with their lives, they were great villains. When we saw our heroes blow up 2 or 3 of their ships at a time, after in the early days, one of their ships was enough to take out an entire fleet, and now it's flipped to Voyager by itself can blow up Borg ships 2 or 3 at a time. And we're still supposed to be invested in them and the threat they present to Voyager. I'm sorry, you've lost me there. Like if you're gonna, and that's another reason why the big reveal of the Borg as the enemy at the end of Picard season 3 fell completely flat. Not only was it a member berry, not only was it going back to the well yet again and leaning on familiar material from an old show, but it's, we're just going to tell the same Borg story we've already told at least 2 or 3 times before. But this time they're really bad. This time they're really serious. It's like, I'm sorry, I don't buy this for a second. They're not threatening. They've lost a bunch of times already. I don't believe for a second they're going to lose now. I don't care. You know, find something different to do with these guys if you want to keep telling stories with them, because they're busted as villains. John Stewart says, so does Murdoch from MacGyver fall into that trope? Because I really love Murdoch episodes. I mean, we know in the end Mac is going to beat him, but they still got us to watch. Well, MacGyver is a little different for me because usually I approach MacGyver from kind of an ironic point of view. Like, to me, a badly written episode of MacGyver can still be immensely entertaining because it's an incredibly fun, watchable show, whether it's good or bad by, standard conventions or not. So yeah, I mean, and in a way, Murdoch, like the running joke of Murdoch, and I don't think this was intentional, but like the fact that Murdoch was supposedly the world's greatest assassin, the world's greatest master of disguise, the most dangerous man in the world, and yet he continually got beaten by MacGyver every single time they crossed paths. I started to read that as kind of funny, because it's like, oh, here comes Murdoch, big bad Murdoch. Gee, I wonder if he's going to beat MacGyver this time. It kind of became funny. So I mean, it depends on the tone of the show and how you engage with the show. If we were meant to take, if the success or failure of a MacGyver episode relied on us taking Murdoch seriously and taking him as a credible threat to MacGyver's life every single time, then I don't think it would have worked. For the same reason I said about the Borg. It's like, well, once MacGyver beats him and then beats him again and then beats him again, like, okay, he's a fallible adversary at that point. He's not really much of a threat anymore. So, but to me anyway, when I watch it, the show doesn't rely on that. The appeal of the show rests in something else. Daryl asks, what does your head and gut say about 2024's electoral votes? I have Trump anywhere from 261 to 345 and Biden anywhere from 193 to 277. I honestly have no idea. I haven't really looked at a map and looked at different state polls to come up with anything. I'm honestly not sure. I'm hoping that your projections for Trump are high, though. David Colby says, I have a huge soft spot for Picard season 1. It's not good, but it has a lot of ideas that are interesting and could have been a fun thing to explore. Then season 2 and 3 happened. I mean, I kind of feel the same way about it. It's not good. If anything, it has too many ideas. It feels like it wants to be like 3 different shows at once, and it just doesn't have time to do any of it. It feels like it wants to tell stories about the ex-Borg. It feels like it wants to tell stories about the Romulans in the aftermath of their homeworld being destroyed. And it feels like it wants to be about, the artificial intelligence, the synths, right? And it has all of those stories crammed into a 10-episode season, and nothing has any room to breathe. And I think I remember saying at the time after I watched the first season, I wish they had just picked one. Just do one of these. Like, make the show about the Romulans in the aftermath of you losing their planet, or make it about the ex-Borg, or make it about the androids. Pick one. Don't try to do all three at once, because then you don't do justice to any of them. And plus it has the same, structural problems that Discovery often has and that a lot of streaming series have that didn't make anything better. But the thing about Picard season 1, though, that none of the other seasons had was you did at least get the sense that they were trying to do something new. They were trying to do something different, especially with Picard himself. They were trying to take him in a different direction. And then, season 2 and season 3 came along and they said, nope, fuck that. We're not doing that. We're going to make it as comfortable and familiar as possible, 255 AD, let me go back to your other two-part question. When scattering my grandfather's ashes, I was reminiscing about him and my uncle. I jokingly mentioned the time he told me he refused to hire women in case they take pregnancy leave. He's admitting it's unfair, but repeated my grandfather's argument and implied he unofficially continues the same hiring policy at the family business. How would you respond to that? Does it have anything to do with you directly? I mean, do you work in the family business? Is it something that you would have to live with on a day-to-day basis? Because otherwise I would say, I mean, what can you do about it? Like, I'm sure I have lots of shitty relatives who have shitty ideas and do things in a shitty way, but it's not my responsibility. And it's not something that I, that takes up space and time in my life. If it's something that you would have to face and deal with on a daily basis or a regular basis, it might be worth having a talk and trying to change his mind and pointing out, that's a really fucked up policy. But I mean, to me, unless it's something that I would have to deal with regularly, like it's not my responsibility. It's not my responsibility to fix my family or to persuade my family to be better people. That's not my job. That's not what I'm here for. Ash Lucia, I always say Murdoch and MacGyver are like Sherlock and Moriarty. Yeah, kind of like they're like, I mean, that's certainly the dynamic that they're trying to emulate. Like a really, really cheesy 1980s action TV series version of Moriarty and Sherlock. Stephen G. Glenard spinoff, Star Trek, incest twins. That was the thing. One of the more interestingly bad things about season 1 of Picard, because like I always talk about season 2 of Picard as being bad in just a fascinating way of just having so many creative choices that just make no sense on basic mechanics of writing levels, and that like the show does things and gets things wrong that I've just never seen shows produced at that level get wrong. But there are things like that a little bit in season 1 as well, not to nearly that level of prevalence. But the incest twins in season 1 of Picard is one of those things where like when I was watching that show when it originally aired, I knew after about 2 episodes, I realized, okay, every time they cut back to this Borg cube, my interest is going to completely vanish. I'm not going to give a shit about any of this. And it's fascinating to think that, look, they're doing like an incest story, not explicitly. They never come out and say like the brother and the sister are fucking, but they're really like the sister is really weirdly flirtatious with the brother. Like there's sexual tension between the brother and the sister. And yet it's so boring. And it's interesting to me how boring it is. Like it tries so hard to be edgy and provocative and shocking and they're brother and sister. Why are they being this way with each other? Right. And it's just so fucking dull. Like I couldn't give less of a shit. Are they fucking or not? I don't care. I don't give a shit. I feel like I should be interested on some level. I should be disgusted or titillated or curious or something. And I just don't care. Like, how can you not care? Well, Picard season 1 figured out a way. to make me just not fucking care at all. Yeah, 255 AD, I think that's the best thing. I mean, you've mentioned these sorts of issues before. It doesn't seem like it's the kind of thing that you could change. It doesn't, I mean, like, if you feel like that his mind could potentially be changed if you reached out and talked to him about it, then sure, go for it. Try to do some good. But if you think you'd just be wasting your breath and it would only reinforce to you this conflict, this disagreement between the two of you, then why bother? Yeah, just change the subject. You know, like I said, it's not necessarily your responsibility to try and fix everybody. You know, um, uh, Dana says, could you give less of a shit? Could you give less of a shit if you were paid enough? Could you force yourself to care? I don't think I could. I could maybe force myself to do work that I didn't care about more readily if the pay was better. Like if there was a certain amount of money involved, the reward might be rich enough to allow me to get over that hump of not caring and do whatever I was required to do, but it wouldn't make me care more. No. No, you can't you can't extract caring and interest from me with money. That's not the way my brain works. David Colby says, oh, something you may want to know. On my TNG rewatch, my most unexpected thing is realizing that Riker is really cool. I forgot most of his scenes and character beats, and they're great. Well, that's really great to hear. Well, I'm glad you think so. Yeah, as a lot of people know, Riker is one of my favorites as well. I love Riker. And yeah, he seems like a guy you'd want to work for, doesn't he? He seems like he'd be a cool boss and a cool guy to get to know. His interactions that we see with other people are almost always very above board and very ethical. People kind of make fun of him for being a Lothario, or for like sleeping around a lot and that kind of thing. But he always seems like to treat people very well, and to have a very positive attitude toward his partners, and to value things like equality and fairness, and not wanting to have too much of an imbalance between himself and his partners. And yeah, he just seems like a really cool dude. I agree. No, Philip, I would agree with that. Jonathan Frakes is not the greatest actor, but I will tell you what, since we've talked about various seasons of Star Trek Picard, just as it happens throughout this stream tonight, Frakes as Riker is, for me, the highlight of Picard season 3. And I think it's some of the best acting Frakes has ever done. It really blew me away. I mean, even when the show, like by about a little more than halfway through season 3 of Picard, when the show had pretty much lost me, when I was like, all right, I'm done. I don't give a shit about this. Like, it had a chance, but it blew it. I don't give a shit. But Frakes always had me. Like Riker, I was always interested in what Riker was doing. I was always interested in watching Riker, and it's not because he was like a super well written. Nobody was all that well written in that season, but Frakes was just knocking it out of the park every scene. Like Riker's in that season a lot. He's in Picard season 3 a bunch, and Frakes is just fucking killing it every single time. He's funny. He's moving. He has some really emotional beats between him and Troy, and him and Picard. And I mean, he's fabulous. He's fabulous. He and Worf are really funny together, and Frakes is amazing. So yeah, I would agree with you. In general, I wouldn't put Jonathan Frakes at the top of my list as like, oh, he's a fantastic actor. He's good. He's fine. He's as good as he needs to be to play Riker. But in season 3 of Picard, he's fantastic. And it stands out even more because I didn't like so much of the rest of it. But Frakes was outstanding. David Colby says, there's this great bit in season 2 or 3 where a dude is fucking Troy and tries to rub it in Riker's face. And without being sexist at all, Riker just completely obliterates him. I know the scene you're talking about where Riker basically says, I'm like, if you make Deanna happy, then Deanna's my friend and I want her to be happy. Like he doesn't show any jealousy or resentment or whatever. Like he's like, no, dude, if you're going out with her and she's happy, then I'm happy. Like that's what I want. Deanna's my friend. I care about her and I want her to be happy. So if that's you, then good for you. Well, Boxy, he only vaporized Judah because he had no other choice. And yeah, David, yeah, that line too, where he's like, if she thinks a complete loser like you is worth her attention, then count your fucking lucky stars, you piece of shit. Carlisle the Cinephile, where's my hat from? I don't recognize the icon. Shame on you. It is the glorious flag of my great state of Maryland, actually. And when I glued the patch on, I glued it on upside down, so technically it should look like this. And one of these days, I'm going to fix it. But for now, I'll just have to make up some excuse as to why it's upside down. But yeah, that is a patch featuring the design of the flag of the great state of Maryland, which, as everybody knows, is the greatest flag. Like not just the greatest state flag; it's the best flag. So there. I was making a joke, Dana. You've never seen that episode, have you? I was making a joke because Riker very clearly had many choices other than vaporize Yuta. $55AG says, I haven't regularly talked to this uncle since I was a teenager, and he's not from the same side of the family as most of my other relatives I've complained about. Rather than wanting to argue, my immediate thought was, damn it, God damn it, I should have known better than to joke about this and think a 58-year-old man would agree. Yeah, but you know what? You chalk it up as a lesson. Try to remember it for next time. It's okay, Carlisle, I forgive you. As long as you pay appropriate tribute to the flag of Maryland. Yeah, Dana, there you go. It's a governmental protest. Yes. By the way, we need to record. I need to get with you and record your dialogue for that video. There's a Maryland flag related video I have written that I haven't shot yet, and I wanted Dana to play a very important role in it. We need to huddle up at some point and record that. And yeah, and there is a reference in it to the fact that my flag patch is upside down, and it is basically what Dana just said. If you had $1 for every Star Trek episode you ain't seen, Dana, I suspect you would have hundreds of dollars. Simon Moody, getting paid for not watching something there is a concept. Yeah, I would. You can pay me to not watch Game of Thrones. I mean, I'm not going to watch it anyway, but if you wanted to pay me not to watch it, I'd accept that. Daryl says, I know Maryland is one of the 5 bluest states in the U.S., along with Hawaii, Vermont, Massachusetts, and California or Rhode Island. Yeah, but it is a little, it's reliably blue when it comes to presidential elections, but we do have a very frustrating history of electing Republicans to be our governor, which like there's a strain of centrism and moderation in the Democratic Party, where there are a lot of Maryland Democrats who still will entertain the idea of voting for a Republican. And we're voting for a Republican for governor anyway. And it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating. So yeah, but we've got a great Democratic governor now. Wes Moore is our governor, just got elected last year, or got elected in 2022, took office last year. And yeah, so we're looking good now. And I mean, I'm hopefully we have a Senate election coming up this year, and our current sitting senator is retiring, so it'll be having to elect a new senator. And the Republican candidate is our former Republican governor, Larry Hogan, who is a piece of shit. The best thing you can say about him is he's one of the very few Republicans who has not bent the knee to Donald Trump, but he's still a piece of shit. And he was a shitty governor, and he'd be a shitty senator, and plus he'd be a Republican vote in the Senate. So hopefully Angela Alsobrook, who is the Democratic candidate, becomes our new senator for Maryland. I'm definitely going to vote for her. But yeah, Maryland, reliably blue when it comes to presidential politics, frustratingly erratic in its blueness in certain other races. And Viper 1969, yes. And there are regions of Maryland, including, unfortunately, the region where I live here in Western Maryland, that are not blue at all. Like, the reason Maryland as a state overall is blue is because it has a couple of large population centers that lean heavily Democratic. The more rural areas are very conservative, and they suck. But thankfully, we have more sensible areas in the middle and over toward where Baltimore is that pull everybody else along. Well, Carlisle, I'm afraid that's never going to happen. I could never betray the flag of Maryland by paying homage to the flag of another state. So I guess we will just have to be enemies. I'm sorry. David Colby says, you know what would be fun? A Star Trek show in Star Wars and a Star Wars show in Star Trek. Farm Boy fights the Klingon Empire. Spaceship explores the far reaches of the Star Wars galaxy. I'd be down for that. Ethan says, I'm sick. I'm going back to bed. Have fun, you guys. Great show. As I want to always mention, my mom is a bigger fan of Steve, but I give him money so she can suck it. Thanks, Ethan, and thanks, Ethan's mom. I love you both. Okay, super chat from Boxy, who says, why did Gul Dukat keep singling out Sakona and punching her in the face? It seemed unnecessary. Well, because Gul Dukat was a dick. Because he was a bad man. He was a bad man. And plus, he was in a that was the episode where they had him tied to the chair, right? And Sakona was the Vulcan member of the Maquis who was like interrogating him. So he was, I guess he was just punching at the people who were restraining him. But he's a bad man. He's a bad man and does bad things. Oh, Viper, you're in Sharpsburg. Yeah, I used to live in Sharpsburg. I lived in Sharpsburg for many years when I was married. We lived in Sharpsburg. I love Sharpsburg is a beautiful town, except for a bunch of the people that live there. That is definitely Trump country. Oh, Sean, thank you. Sean gave me $1.99 for not watching Game of Thrones. I knew that would pay off. All right, now let me turn away from the live chat for just a minute so I can do my end of show plugs, because it's about time to end the show, and then I will come back and look for any last questions, and then we will wrap things up. So first of all, if you enjoy this stuff that I do here on YouTube, all the videos I make and so forth, you can help me continue to make those videos by becoming a supporter of this channel. You can do so, and you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can become a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, or you can become a channel member by just clicking the join button right here on YouTube and selecting your level of support. Patrons and members at all levels of support get access to the prompt that I send out the Monday before these Ask Away streams, soliciting questions. So you get to ask me questions ahead of time. Those are the questions I ask in the first part of the show that were submitted ahead of time by patrons and members, and any level of support gets you access to that. So if that's something you seem interested in, or if you just want to help me to continue making these videos and doing things on this channel, patreon.com/Steve Shives, or click the join button. Either way is a great way to support me. And Jackson in the chat says, hit that like button. Yes, absolutely. All of the non-monetary ways of supporting the channel are greatly appreciated too. Like, share, subscribe, all of that. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. I couldn't do this without my financial supporters, but I couldn't do it without the rest of you either. Like, every little bit helps. If you share a video of mine, if you post a video of mine, on a forum that you go to, or in a subreddit that you think people will appreciate it, or share it on your social media or whatever, share it in a Facebook group, or any place you happen to be active or you think it would be relevant and well received, that's incredibly appreciated. And I'm very, very grateful and thank you for doing that, and just for being here and watching and paying attention. It's Yeah, I couldn't do it without you. So I really appreciate you. Also, if you like the YouTube stuff I do, you will probably be interested in the podcasts that I am on as well. I am a co-host on a couple of podcasts that are a part of the Let Me Listen family of podcasts. One of those is Late Seating, the movie review podcast that I do alongside the brilliant, wonderful Jason Harding. Where we take a look at classic films and see if they deserve whatever reputation they have, be it good or bad. Our most recent episode of Late Seating is our review of the Ralph Bakshi animated feature, Fritz the Cat. We have some thoughts on Fritz the Cat in our new episode of Late Seating. And then our next episode that will be coming out in a couple of weeks will be our review of the classic 1980s sci-fi film Enemy Mine, which I'm really looking forward to. It's been a long time since I watched Enemy Mine, but that's the next episode. And besides Late Seating, there's also the Ensign's Log, which is the Star Trek themed improv comedy podcast that I am on alongside Jason, and also alongside Dana Cole, who is with us in the chat, and of course is also my co-host on the Trek Reluctantly streams we do every week on Wednesday. And in the Ensign's Log, Dana and Jason and I play characters who live in the Star Trek universe in the TNG Deep Space Nine era. And we kind of are having our own adventures and telling our own stories while the events that happened during that era of the TV show are sort of happening off to the side or in the background. We just recently finished our 6th season. So you have 6 full seasons of the Ensign's Log to listen to and catch up on and hopefully enjoy if you've never listened to the show. And because we are currently on hiatus between seasons, we're going to start up recording season 7 in a couple of weeks. But before we get there, tomorrow on this channel, on my channel right here, tomorrow, Saturday, June 22nd at 6 p.m. Eastern, the same start time as this live stream was, only tomorrow, we are doing our Ensign's Log Season 6 live Q&A. It'll be a live stream featuring myself and Dana and Jason, all 3 of us together on the stream for it usually goes about 2 hours, the same as these go, but it'll be all 3 of us talking to the chat, talking to each other about the show, answering questions. So if you are a fan of the Ensign's Log, if you are a fan of Jason, as well as myself and Dana, we really hope you can make it tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern for the annual Ensign's Log Between Seasons live stream. It's something that I look forward to every single year. It's one of my favorite shows that we do because it's just fun to have all 3 of us together live on the show, to indulge in our unique brand of hijinks and foolishness for all of you. It's such a fun show to make. It's great for the 3 of us to get together and record that show. And it's great for the 3 of us to get together and talk to all of you as well. So it's linked in the description of this video. If you want to go ahead and click the link and set a reminder, or just, remember, tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern, this channel, the Ensign's Log Season 6 Q&A live stream. All right, that's it. Let me take a look back at the live chat and see what final questions we have. And of course, and don't forget charity links dot page as well. I forgot those. I saw the links that some random geek was sharing in the chat, and I thought, oh shit, I didn't mention charity links. Charity links dot page also linked in the description. If you have a couple of bucks left over, please consider helping out some friends of ours who are in need. Charity links dot page includes like PayPal links and GoFundMe links, crowdfunding links, and begging bowls and stuff like that from friends of ours who need a helping hand, who need some financial support. And please consider making use of those outlets to help out some people in need. We really appreciate it. Boxy Brown, yes, there is an orgy in Fritz. Yes, there is. Harry Behemoth, why did the liberal Al Gore create global warming with his weather dominator? Because he really wanted to win an Oscar for that documentary. Um, 255 AD says, the main reason I changed the subject is my typical response to that is your small business shouldn't exist if you can't afford not to discriminate. But you can't say that when it's the family business granddad founded in 1974. Even that's what you secretly think. Well, I think discretion is the better part of valor in that situation. Kara says, I love your askaways, and I'm always pleased that you read out my questions. So thanks again in case I don't get the chance before you go. Well, I always enjoy reading your questions, Kara. Your questions are always so interesting and fun to answer. So thank you for being here and being a supporter and submitting questions all the time. I appreciate that. All right. I believe that'll do it, folks. So I will see you hopefully along with Dana and Jason tomorrow for the Ensign's Log live stream at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then I'll see you next Wednesday with Dana for Trek Reluctantly, and a bunch of times before that and after that and in between for all kinds of other videos. So thank you all so very much for hanging out with me and asking such awesome questions and supporting the channel in all of the different ways you do. And I will see you tomorrow for the Ensign's Log live stream. And until then, have a good night. Have a good weekend. Take care, everybody.